And welcome back to Beer Fueled Fantasy Football. We are back here in what we're going to kind of call our summer lull period, in between when we start deep diving into all the redraft news or kind of post-draft. So we're just going to have some discussion topics for you guys. On today's episode, we're going to go into some fantasy fallacies and bad analysis that you might see in articles, stuff that you should be on the lookout for before you start hitting the onslaught of analysis you're going to get about who to draft, who not to draft. Just jump into all that. But before we get into that, just quick social media shout out for all of us here. We are at Beer Fueled FF individually. I'm at Nick Sparts. To my left, modeling the Beer Fueled Fantasy Football gray shirt and hat is Christopher Hopper.
At Hot BFF with 2 P's. Quite an interesting run on Twitter this week, so make sure you give me a follow.
Yeah, give us all a follow. It's been interesting.
Everybody.
And then across the table, modeling the original red is Dan Thury.
I am at Thury BFF. What's up, crowd?
So please check us out on YouTube, Beer Fueled Fantasy Football, so you can see us. We have all 3 colored shirts going on. I'm rocking the teal today.
Yeah, check out the merch and then DM us and buy some.
We really need the money.
Support the show. We got to do.
Beyond that, Hopper and I were on as with guest spots with Goat District and Top 2. Top 2's dropped on Wednesday, so last week, and Goat District's, I believe, is going to drop either Saturday or Sunday. So by the time you hear this, it should be out. And then Dan is going to be on a roundtable with Dynasty ER and a few other people, and I think that's going to be posted to their YouTube channel.
Yep. Yes. Make sure you check it out and follow us on Twitter to find all of our guest spots. We've got several more coming up in the coming weeks. It's probably going to be a trend throughout the summer. So.
Oh, and then there was the article that got posted by
Garbage Time. Yes.
That they went over our top 10 that we are top 10, our best ball format league that we went through, just our thoughts and strategies.
Things, words.
Words are tough. Obviously, with me, words are always
It was a bit of a mishmash article because it was not written by one person, but there's some good information over there about what strategies people were doing as they were running through it.
Most of us were new to best ball leagues anyway, so it's fun to hear about that.
And Hakun does a good job of presenting it. So,
All right, so I think that's all we've did for guest spots. Any other major announcements we've got before we run into this episode?
Just merch.
Yeah, just
merch.
Which we're
as you can
literally
see
modeling
with the new hats and new shirts. So big shout out to Open House Print Shop for that. You can follow us guys on Facebook and Instagram if you want to check out their works.
And since apparently that's a credibility issue problem for us, follow us on Instagram as well at Beerfield FF.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry we don't.
Our Instagram following makes us not legitimate. So if you would,
sorry if you don't. That we don't buy our followers.
Yeah.
All right.
We buy you guys with charm and wit and fantasy advice.
All right. And shall we kick it off with a beer preview, which I think is the main selling point for why people follow us?
Beer?
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
All right, and coming back for the third time, we have Upland Brewing's Coastbuster Imperial IPA. It's the third time Upland has been on the show. They're based out of Bloomington, Indiana. First time they've been on in 2018, though. The first 2 times they were on is, I think, about episode 5 and 25.
Yeah, it was last summer. It had been a bit. It was one of those things where we featured them a couple of times early, and then we're like, okay, we need to diversify, and then we didn't bring them back for whatever reason, which...
We diversified a little too much.
Right.
A little too hard.
We got them on here again. They do good stuff. They were one of the first breweries to really interact with us, so...
Yeah, I think Victory and them were the first 2 that ever even talked to us at all. So
yep. So
we appreciate Upland a lot. We'll tweet at you when we post this episode. For Coastbuster, it is a 8.5% hop forwards West Coast style IPA. We'll give you a full review when we're about halfway through the fantasy fallacies. But first, we have some minor news. And the reason we're going straight into legal news is because there's really no actual NFL news this week outside of...
It's weird. It feels weird.
There's some hype coming out of minicamp, mostly Miami, which, as I said, I believe on
mostly
Goat District's Goat District's pod, I don't believe a single thing that I hear out of Miami's camp.
Yeah, Chicago Nagy had some hype on Shaheen and Cohen, just saying that he really liked them and he liked the way Shaheen fit the offense, but
it's all hype.
It's hype season.
So we're not going to deep dive into any of that. Once we start getting tangible information, that's when we'll start talking about that. But because we got the legal news drop, we have 2 pieces of legal news. Robbie Anderson had his felony resisting arrest with violence charge dropped, so probably still facing a suspension, but at least he's not going to prison now.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sure.
Why, if that charge was dropped, because did you see the story on why the charge was actually dropped? First off,
I did not.
She lied about
it.
So
no, that was Reuben Foster.
Reuben Foster.
So what happened with Robbie Anderson is he was apparently at a concert, right? And he had backstage passes, and he was trying to use those passes to get backstage. And this cop, Captain Ortiz or whatever, was trying to prevent him from going backstage. And it got into a little bit of a loud like yelling match or whatever. But the captain said he shoved him. The other 2 officers on scene, as well as witnesses, said he didn't shove him. He didn't raise a hand to him. He literally didn't do anything wrong.
Okay,
so he likely won't face the suspension, I don't think.
All right. I was just reporting what I'd read on Roto World, but they tend to be pretty solid on that in terms of their projections, but they're not perfect. So
yeah, we'll see. Just given that part of it, unless there's more to it that I didn't see, but given that part of the story, I would find it hard to believe that a suspension comes from that, if that's what it is.
It's still Goodell. It could still happen.
Yeah, that is true.
Josh Gordon suspended for 16 games. All right. And then the other big one was Reuben Foster's ex-girlfriend recanted her previous statements about Foster hitting her and said it was all made up as part of a quote-unquote money scheme.
Yeah, this one may still carry a suspension, though, because there were weapons charges involved also, if I read correctly.
Yeah, he shouldn't get hit with a domestic violence charge because it sounds like that was all BS, but I think he got hit with a drug charge in a separate incident and then the weapons charge.
Right, so it doesn't carry the mandatory suspension, but I'd be surprised if something doesn't happen still. But sounds like he will return to the 49ers, at least after that legal issue is officially closed on May 23rd. So...
All right. That's all I've got for news. Let's hit fantasy fallacies.
Fantasy fallacies.
Aw.
That would be a great song.
Yeah.
I do what I can.
He's going to drop an album of just our drops.
Yeah, I am.
The drops have been amazing, man. I appreciate that.
Now on iTunes.
Now on iTunes, Pure Fuel drops.
Pure Fuel drops.
Oh, man.
All right. So basically what this segment is going to be, we're going to go through some fallacies you'll see, and this could be what people are doing in analyzing their own decision making, or you might see it in the way people are writing articles or talking about content on podcasts. So these are just things to be aware of when you're either reading or trying to go through your own decision making. So we're just going to kick these off in discussion formats. The first one I'm kicking off here is being too detail-oriented. So basically, you're not seeing the bigger picture because you're too focused on something that really doesn't matter. And the best example I have for this is like when you're in the draft and you're really paying attention to when your players' bye weeks are. Because it's by the time you probably get to those bye weeks, your team's changed so much it doesn't matter. So it's not something worth focusing on. And you'll see this in other things that you see in the fantasy industry.
Yeah, I can't really add on to the bye week argument because that is the bye week argument. It's that your team is going to look so different by the time you get 4, 5, 6 weeks in when those bye weeks really start to hit you, and then 7, 8, 9 when bye-apocalypses happen, that it's likely to not affect you. You can find a streaming option. There's going to be trades. You're going to make waiver moves hopefully every week if you're playing to win. So
one of the guys on the bye week is probably going to be hurt by then, and it won't matter. And
so
it's one of the most common questions asked amongst new players or new people in the fantasy communities. Should I worry about bye weeks when I'm drafting? And the answer to that is no.
All right. Did you guys think of any other examples of being too detail-oriented?
The only other example I had would be overalizing depth charts and competition. So like the impact of, mid to late round rookies on already established veterans and what that's going to mean specifically in redraft. Mm-hmm. We're talking like Dallas Goedert coming in affecting Zach Ertz. It's not likely to affect his redraft value because he should be in the Trey Burton role, for example. Dynasty, yes, but redraft, not necessarily. There's a couple others examples of this, but I think that was the most high-profile one. Cortland Sutton and his impact on Demaryius Thomas right out the gate is another one that you could really look at, but just don't overanalyze. I'm saying this because this is a mistake I made last year. Don't overanalyze how a rookie is going to impact an established veteran. It consistently performs at a high level.
And specifically to your Dallas Goedert example, there's 2 bodies that he's already replacing, so it shouldn't have any effect on Zach Ertz. Selleck and Burton are both gone.
Right. He's such a big man, he replaces
2 plus.
Right.
He needs a little of Ertz too.
Yep.
So yeah, that's just something, if you ever see any analysis that seems to be too focused on the details without missing the bigger picture, it's just something to be aware of. And it's a fallacy that we do see in the industry. Moving on to the second one I've got here, it's single metric bias. So this is where somebody tries to base their entire argument off of one trait, whether it be spark score, draft position, dominator rating. They only watch film and don't look at anything else. Or a shout out to Dynasty Guru FF if they're only looking at PSI, which I think even he would not recommend doing.
No, I don't think he would either. I think it's a great metric, but I don't think he would say only use this.
So yeah, this is something you see a lot where people try to base their entire argument on this, and it's just something you want to say, hey, that this is not a good argument somebody's making. They should be looking at multiple facets as we preached on it. When we get questions when you go guest on pod all the time, they're like, oh, what do you think about this guy's running his fast 40 time or something? We're just like, it's a single piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I don't care. The example that I had for this would be profiling Deshaun Watson just based on touchdowns, which seems to be happening a lot these days. Mm-hmm. Because he came out and he performed well, but when you really look into if you just focus on that, yeah, he did. But if you really look into the big picture, you realize that, his touchdown percentage was 9.3. Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Tom Brady for their careers all right around 5.5. I think Brees is 5.3, Manning's 5.7. His interception percentage was 3.9. Oh, wait, well, there's a red flag because Rex Grossman's was 3.8, Jay Cutler's 3.3, and Blake Bortles 2.9. So you just really, and his sack percentage would have ranked 8th in the league. So you just really have to pay attention to everything that's going on, not just, okay, small sample size, lots of touchdowns, we're good. You've got to look at everything.
Yeah, and this is also the point of Calvin Ridley, who gets a lot of hate based on his Spark score. And that's where a lot of people who have, may have liked him pre-combine will now turn off of him because he didn't fit their athletic profile right away. We've seen, players, be productive in this league who aren't athletically, gifted. So, well, there's more to the piece.
Yeah,
Nick, I know you want to argue Spark score.
No, I was going to say there's more than one red flag for me on.
I know, but yeah. That's the big piece, and that's just to this point.
That was when the narrative turned on him. Was when the
Spark score, yeah.
All right, and actually, I'm going to bring up Watson in another one of these fallacies later in this episode because
everything's about Watson.
He fits a lot.
He fits a lot of these.
He could have fit the next one too, honestly.
Yep. Vacuum fallacy. Not taking account the big picture when making decisions, which I love. Dan, I actually titled this off of Dan's one here, and it's Dan. You put that you're making decisions basically on trade calculators or Twitter polls and not looking at the big picture.
So this is huge, and this is a bigger problem in Dynasty, not so much in just redraft. It does become an issue in redraft, towards July and August, and then for the entire season. Is that it's hard to post an actual depth chart online, and it's hard to really give all the the full context of that person's roster, of the other person's roster. If it's a trade thing, it's hard to post all the smaller league scorings that are being taken into account, which may give boosts like return yards. For instance, for guys like Juju Smith-Schuster last year, who was a punt returner, or Tariq Hill, who does a lot of the punt returns, and kick returns. So it's hard. You don't want to just base everything off of what that Twitter poll said. Don't just make a snap decision because one person or a 200 size group of people, maybe 80% of them say do this because they don't know the entire picture.
Yeah, and you can make trades too where it's the right trade for your team, even if it is not a ideal trade based on a Twitter poll.
Because for Dynasty, you want to look outside of just a 1 year, 2 year box. So
yeah, for an example, I overpaid for LaShawn McCoy in a second. I gave up Devontae Parker, Jamal Williams, and Gio Bernard because I needed to free up roster spots. So I overpaid to consolidate value on my team.
Your team's also more of a win now. You see your window, you want to capitalize on it.
Yeah. So it's all about this one is just basically don't get too suckered into just value metrics. When looking at trades or moves you're going to be making on your team, we'll try to look at the bigger picture.
I had another example for this too, and it's actually more for dynasty rookie drafts, but don't fade guys too much based on their current situation. You have to look long term. So don't just only take into account, okay, this is what's happening right now. Make sure you extrapolate that. No contract situations, other guys on that depth chart, no team situations, know what's happening. A good example of this would be Christian Kirk, Cortland Sutton, Calvin Ridley, Dallas Goedert, guys that are blocked right now from their full potential. You need to look at long term there, not just what's happening right now. So big picture decisions.
That's why I love Goddard in rookie drafts.
Yeah,
because you can get him late, and he is going to be the potential new Greg Olsen.
Yeah,
Martellus Bennett.
Yep, I definitely agree with that. Is don't look too small picture with that. They say, oh, their situation sucks, fade them. That's way too short.
Unless you're John Kelly. But then again, John Kelly also fits in this narrative because we actually like him, and he landed into a not so ideal situation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's also too about guys with not obvious top tier talent landing in questionable situations. That is a situation where you fade somebody.
Yep.
All right. Homerism, being biased towards teams or players you're familiar with.
I hate this.
I do too. Two ways you can go with this on either side of the coin. You're either fading players on teams you hate because they play for a team you hate. Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams. Cowboys fans are bad about this with Giants players. Eagles fans are bad about this with Cowboys players.
We have
we have a lot of examples to this.
We do have a lot of examples of this. And the other thing is overvaluing people because they're on your favorite team, which is, again, there's certain fan bases that are worse about this than others, but we're not going to call them out, specifically Dallas. But just make sure you're giving true evaluation of players, because at the end of the day, you're not playing fantasy because you have a rooting interest in a single team. You're playing fantasy to win. And have fun.
And he should have fun. So if you're in a situation where, like, I value two guys the same,
you can be a tiebreaker.
I'm not being a homer. I'm going to grab one player from my team right here because I want to have somebody on my team to root for. That's fine. Go ahead and do that. It's your team. Have fun. But especially when you're starting to look at like Dynasty and stuff, you really have to not be like being like, I will not draft any Cowboys players, because you're just hurting your own team.
Again, this is a mistake made by a lot of new players. My girlfriend, shout out to my girlfriend who told me she will never draft Aaron Rodgers. Ever. I'm like, so if he's in the 10th round and he slid to you and you would not shoot, nope, I wouldn't take him. And I go, well,
terrible decision.
Yep. Now, I often...
and I know she listens, so I'm on the record of saying terrible decision.
Now,
terrible.
I very rarely own Aaron Rodgers in any draft just because he often goes too early.
Yes, I know.
He goes way before I want to, but if he slides to round 6, I'm taking him.
But
yes, absolutely.
Like, we've seen this mistakes, based on my league when it was more of a redraft focus. I know Nick can contest to this. We have a lot of Vikings fans in that draft because obviously we're from Minnesota. So we see guys like Christian Ponder go in like round 7, and like Blair Walsh would go in like round 6.
Why are you calling Nico out?
It wasn't Nico because he's a Packer fan. I was more calling Dom out. But it's okay to draft it's okay to draft players from your favorite team. We're not saying that's the problem. It's reaching on them and hurting your roster and the overall league's rosters because of it.
Yeah, well, you also don't want to overexpose your team to one offense. Most of the time, that's going to hurt you.
That, again, is
especially
a very common
if they have a
mistake.
bad week. You're pretty much punting a week at that point.
Yeah. Unless it's like the
or a tough matchup,
was
or
it
whatever.
The 2014 Broncos or something? That's usually not good.
Right.
It was a Colts a few years ago.
Saints have done it a couple of years also, but
Yeah, you generally don't want to be overexposed to one team.
Yep.
All right, sunk cost fallacy.
I think these next two kind of go together a little bit.
A little bit. So this is refusing to change your opinion or valuation of a player based on a previous investment that you can no longer recover. For example, a top 2 or 3 round draft pick that is performing terribly or gets benched, but you don't want to trade him for less value. You don't want to drop him. You're still trying to start him, things like that, when it's not working out and it's obvious at this point that you should just bail.
Eddie Lacy.
Eddie Lacy a few years ago would be a perfect example of that.
Yeah. I don't have anything else to add to that. It's pretty straightforward. If you invest in somebody and they're not performing, get out from under them in Dynasty while somebody still believes. Unless you still believe, but in which case, don't start them. I mean, you're just hurting yourself at that point.
Wait for value, and this is...
Wait for them to show it.
Yeah, like this is like the value game. Like, we're not saying to go out and just cut these guys because they still have... they still have value to their name.
Name cache.
I try to throw them in a trade. I want this player. I'll give you this player plus this guy who was a top pick, but it sucked.
Yeah, because those high round draft picks, especially that aren't performing, are typically good throw-in pieces to get the plus that you need on a trade.
Yep.
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. Those are moves that I would 100% recommend, but it's don't hold on for dear life just because I invested highly in this person.
Again,
therefore, it must work out.
Right.
Again, this is mostly for the casual or newer players. It's just don't hold too much value to names if they're struggling.
Or even veteran players that just sometimes need to come back down to earth and a reminder. It happens.
Yep, it does. It doesn't happen just to rookies. It happens to everybody.
Oh, yeah, this is not exclusive to just rookies.
Because
we're guilty of it.
We have pride.
Yeah, and this is just part of it every week is new information on a player, and you should be adjusting your expectations based on what you see every week.
Yep.
All right, loss aversion fallacy, which is kind of an inverse to this is kind of tying to homerism a little bit too, but it's basically you've gotten burned by a player previously, so now you are refusing to draft them. Sammy Watkins.
Yep.
But yeah, basically
Jimmy Graham.
Yeah, it's just
of recency.
Of recency.
But yeah, basically previous bad outcomes are influencing your future decisions. So anytime you've had a player where that's burned you once or twice and now you're just like, I'm not going to own them, try to avoid that. You can definitely be like, if you can tie break away from them because you're just like, I've been burned too many times before, but don't completely avoid them.
No, you can't do that. I mean, if you get a guy that's like Des Bryant of recency, and he lands in a good landing spot with good opportunity, even if he's burned you before, if he falls, you owe it to yourself to still get the best value guys that you can get if, he's the only receiver remaining in a tier. Don't just avoid him just for the sake of not owning him.
You guys hit it. That's perfect.
Yep. So that's just something to be aware of is you can definitely have players who are like, I would prefer not owning them, but if the value's there, you still take them. All right. Beer review?
Beer review.
So what do you guys think of your breakfast Coastbuster?
So fruity and a little bit hoppy on the front end. It's got that juicier profile that a lot of West Coast do, that more citrusy profile, I guess. Juicier is more New England phrase because it's sweet, but it's got a more citrusy profile of hops on the front end, and then it finishes a little bit alcohol-y, but it's not unpleasant.
Yeah, it tastes like 10, 11%.
It tastes stronger than it is.
Not taste. It finishes like a 10, 11% type of beer. It's only 8.5, but it's got a great up front. It's got the great, just taste from the front end like they wanted to.
Little bitter, not overly bitter.
Yep.
No, it's really for an Imperial. It's really not that hoppy. Most of them are much hoppier than this. We'll say it's a little rough at 11:30 in the morning, but I'll get it done.
It was your decision, Nick. You wanted to go this early.
Well, no, we all have reasons to go.
We all have reasons.
I know,
well,
but I want to blame Nick.
It's better that way, in my opinion, but
Yeah, we'll get the can art on there because I actually really kind of like this logo. I think it's really well done.
It is.
So we'll get that. We'll get that on Instagram. Follow us there at Beerfield FF if you want to see the can art of all the beers we drink.
All right. Pointless analysis?
Yep.
Pointless advice.
Which we could use that segment for, like if people ever tweet at us non-football related questions, and we want to do them on there.
I want to keep that actually, and we should just do a pointless advice segment like on Wednesday episodes or something like that, just to kind of kill it off. And we did open mic for a while. We should, or maybe we should tag team them. We're on air planning right now. Maybe we should tag team them. Maybe we should do one on Monday episodes like an open mic and one on Wednesday episodes like pointless advice.
We definitely could.
Okay.
We're gonna branch away from fantasy football a little bit and do some.
Thank you all of our listeners for joining our production meeting on air.
It's not the first time. Probably won't be the last.
It will definitely not be the last time.
All right, for pointless analysis, past performance does not guarantee future performance, and this is what actually triggered this entire article or script for me. Is I read this on a website and I started reading. They were going through and doing individual team by team breakdowns of strength of schedule for all the skill position players. We've seen every single year that there's at least 12 teams that completely flip the script of what they were last year and makes all this analysis just thrown out the window by week 3. Mm-hmm. So it's basically every year's kind of a reboot. There's a few teams we know what they're going to be, but the most teams surprise us every single year. And trying to figure this out in May as to what certain fantasy players' strength of schedule is going to be, I think is a little insane.
Like most teams will figure out what they are until week 5 of the season. Like they got to go through their own growing pains throughout the season. Yep.
And the other thing that I kind of combined with this was ignoring change, like noticeable change. For example, the fact that Seattle's defense is retooling. Mm-hmm. The Bears retooled their offense. You can't, because a team's been historically good or historically bad at something, you need to look at coordinator changes. You need to look at personnel changes. You need to look at who's leaving, who's coming in, and factor that into your decision. You can't just ignore that because what is today is not necessarily yesterday.
Yeah, and you cannot project that on 2017 numbers. Best you can do is look at like the Bears and say, I expect that offense to be better, but we don't know for sure.
Know yet. Yep.
But that's our expectation.
Yeah, but you're still going to bump up. We've talked about it before. You're going to bump Trubisky up because of that offense being better, and maybe a guy like Jordan Howard, who we'll talk about on Wednesday, has fewer red flags, and you're going to make adjustments. Seattle's defense is now not a 9th round pick.
Yeah, they're a non-pick.
Yeah, so
we're gonna make that. We'll make
that
hammer
that home this entire summer,
entire offseason.
If a single one of our listeners drafts the Seattle's defense, we failed as a podcast.
Shame.
You know that we're not going to get tweets from somebody doing it just to spite us.
Probably.
Look what I did. Fuck you guys.
Probably Sean.
10th round
probably Sean is right.
Probably Sean.
10th round in my Dynasty startup, I drafted Seattle's defense. All right, up next is Argumentum ad populum. It's basically when you buy into hype trains because everyone else is freaking out a player, aka the Joe Williams effect.
Yeah, I made a joke about this actually on Dynasty GOAT. So, but yeah, don't buy into somebody just because other people are. Stick to your guns. It's the same thing. The note I had on this was the inverse: falling on a player because everybody else is falling on a player. If you see something you like and you have empirical data to back that up, stick with it.
Yeah. I mean, and you don't
and trust your gut.
And certain times you won't even have empirical data. You'll just have a good hunch based on how the situation appears to be developing.
Like Terrell Pryor,
which we're going to get that. We're going to go into that a lot on Wednesday's episode, where we're talking about a lot of these situations where we don't have data to tell us where things are going.
Terrell Pryor was definitely, I think we called this out to a learning experience.
It was a huge one
because we had our gut thoughts and then we went back on them, and our gut thoughts ended up being right. So.
Yes, you shall not trick us again, Pryor.
We will not fall into you.
Where did he go?
Jets.
So
they have like 15 receivers on that depth chart.
Nothing is clear cut.
Like the Balin of fucking receivers. Just
hoard
everything.
Yeah.
And that's a situation too. And I don't think I'm even being facetious about that. I'm pretty sure it is 15 receivers on their depth chart.
There's a lot.
You're probably right.
There's a lot.
All right. Next up is overly vague analysis. So you'll see this a lot of times, people doing bust lists, sleeper lists, things like that, but they don't actually define the terms of what they're doing. So you'll see like, hey, here's some sleepers, and like one guy will be a guy who's being drafted in like the 4th or 5th round, and another guy, and then they also have guys being drafted in the 15th. It's like your definitions are too vague to actually provide any sort of analysis or information.
Yep, and this is why when we do a sleeper episode or a breakout episode or something like that, before we start the segment, we will define exactly what criteria we are using to discuss those players.
Yeah. You guys hit it. It's perfect.
Yeah. And it's just a way of making sure that everything is put in a box and we're actually meeting some sort of standard with what we're saying, and you guys understand where we're coming from. It's just not a bunch of player names.
Yeah.
Correlation versus causation. Basically, this is projecting long-term data without knowing true cause of the previous result. And this is basically reading too much into small sample sizes. The example I gave was after week 1 last year, we thought the Saints defense was horrendous. Turned out to be one of the best in the NFL.
Yeah.
So you can't know enough on really small sample sizes. Watson would also fall into this category.
Watson does fall into this category. I went with a different example, though, because I think that there's another way you can look at this also, projecting long-term data without knowing the true effects. And I actually want to use Matt Ryan for this as a regression to the mean example. Because if you have a player that has especially that has the 2 or 3, 4 seasons under their belt, that has a year that is just way off, either good or bad, of what they've done, they're likely going to regress to the mean unless there's some thing you can point out that's the reason for that. So like injury to a quarterback, for example, injury to a key lineman for a running back. You can correlate some of that stuff, but then there's a guy like Matt Ryan, and this is what the guy I wanted to throw out here. So in 2016, Matt Ryan went 69.9% completion percentage, 4,994 yards, 38 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. We called for his regression last year, and here's why. For his career, he had been at 64.9% completion, 4,179 yards a year on average, 26 touchdowns, 12.6 interceptions. 2017, he regressed back to that. 64.7% for 2017 versus a career average of 64.9, 4,095 yards versus a career average of 4,179, 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He fell right back into line with where he was, and that's why we called for that. Is you look at, especially with a guy like Ryan, who has 9-10 seasons under his belt, you look at what the mean is, and if somebody's way off of that just randomly, it's likely they're going to come back down to earth the following season to what they've done those previous years.
Yeah, that and the only mistake we made is we didn't quite project the regression hard enough because we still had him as a top 5-6.
It wasn't just us; it was everybody.
It was everybody.
But it's one of those things where it's like you expect regression. I mean, look like a guy like Kamara, for this year, where like what he did last year was historic to a certain extent. You expect regression. Just how much of that regression are we going to see?
Yeah, and the argument for Kamara obviously is that we expect the efficiency to go down, but the touches to go up, so it should balance somewhat. But
even with the Mark Ingram suspension, on coach speak, they expect him to get, or Sean Payton wants to still give him the same amount of touches now.
Yeah, I expect we'll see more.
I expect more, but we'll see.
All right, lack of detail. This is basically making calls without considering all of the facts of the situation. I think the biggest offender of this, you see this around free agency time, where you'll see people make free agent articles and they'll just project players to teams just because it sounds like that would be a fun fit, without actually considering
it's the Madden effect.
Yeah, what's the cap space? Like, do they actually have a void at that position? Are they willing to pay at that position? What have they done historically? I saw multiple people like projecting Le'Veon Bell to the Ravens this last offseason when they did not have the cap space to sign Le'Veon Bell if he'd left the Steelers.
It could have been like the Rams and just, kind of forfeit their future a little bit because they won't be able to afford everybody after the season to kind of make that run. That does happen. We just saw that this year, as I just said, with the Rams, but it's not, it's not a common.
Well,
move.
And not only is it not common, that's not something the Ravens do. We know what Ozzie does.
Yeah, I know.
Yep. The other one that I had would be the other example I'd have for making calls of that, considering all the facts, fading players due to injury, missed time, bad season, that type of thing. Mike Evans, he's currently going at 209 off of, Jameis Winston was hurt for half the year.
God, that's so insane.
David Johnson, going outside of the top 5 is also a thing right now because he had a fluke wrist injury. Amari Cooper having a random down year, being faded extremely hard. You just, after 2 straight 1,000-yard seasons to start his career, you have to look at why things happen. You have to look for that correlation, that causation, take all the facts into account before you make that choice and that decision.
Yeah, when you see a lot of these player changes, you kind of got to actually sit down, look at everything, and paint the full picture of what you're looking at. And
it's the same thing with Dynasty rookie drafts. We mentioned it earlier in the episode, but it's the same thing. You need to look at all the facts, look at contract situations, look at potential outs on guys that are on that depth chart to determine how soon is this guy going to be valuable, or could this guy be valuable.
All right. Second to last one we've got confirmation bias. Arguments that ignore evidence that contradicts their points.
This happens so much.
Is this targeted?
No, this is something I see all over the place, not just you.
Wait, not just me? All right.
But yeah, this is basically if you'll see people be like, hey, nobody comes back and performs the same from ACL tears except Adrian Peterson and like 3 other examples. It's
Jamal Charles.
Yeah, it's a situation where you have to, if they're having to like put disclaimers or just completely ignore counterpoints to their example, that it's not necessarily that their point will be incorrect or wrong, but they're not actually giving you the full story.
It's a biased article.
Yep,
which is not terrible. It's not the worst thing in the world, but you have to come in with some.
You'll see this with numbers a ton also, and I almost cut the Bilal Powell incident last year out and used it as an example for this.
Oh, where you spun it both ways?
Where I portrayed it one way, then you're like, yeah, you were high on him, so I completely spun it the other way. You can make numbers say whatever you want based on whatever you pick out. So make sure that if somebody's painting a picture, that you go check those numbers. There may be evidence that's contradictory. You got to make sure that everything supports the point that you're making, disclaimer, talk about the pros and the cons. Especially we try to do that because our job is to educate. Next episode, that's all we're doing is talking pros and cons on particular players. Mm-hmm. Teaser. But, just make sure that if you're making an argument, you cover both sides of it.
Yeah, this is we try to do our best
for analysts to listen to, but also
we try to do our best here to give you guys not just as Hopper said, our pros and cons for each player, and not just give you our bias on a player because we love that player. We want to make sure that you guys get both sides of the argument.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind too is if you ever see an article, and this will often play into this here too, is or hear a podcast where somebody just basically is all love or all hate for a player, they're probably being too extreme on it. They should generally be falling somewhere between those extreme points, because almost every player in the NFL is going to have at least some good and some bad.
That's why we have three of us, so we balance each other out. Otherwise, you would think Curtis Samuel is the worst player in the league.
Well, no, I think we're in agreement on that one.
We all hate Curtis Samuel here.
Okay,
We'll find some pros,
Okay.
even though they're small. We'll find them.
Okay, Cam Newton.
Yeah, that's about one we balance
better.
out.
So,
All right, and then the last one here is going to be argument by authority, and this is kind of a two-pronged one. Basically, people painting themselves as an expert authority figure as a basis for their argument.
This is targeted,
Well,
but not on purpose. This is on accident.
It was very on purpose.
Okay.
Before we get to the on purpose part, though, this is also where you often see coach speak used as a piece of evidence for why a player will do better or worse. Because the coach has said something, and then people start putting that into their projection or argument as to why a player is going to do X. Yeah, during mini
right now.
I'm going to name this after Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith, because that's what they do, is they just make hot takes with no support whatsoever.
and their supporting
Their
argument
entire
is that
shows are
they're
based off of hot takes. It's ridiculous.
I mean, their entire thing is their point is important because they said it, basically.
And they're loud about it.
It's because I said so, and I yelled about it.
Yep. So that's where all the coach speak comes from. The other place you'll see this is people making an argument with no support, but their entire basis of the argument is, hey, I get a lot of podcast downloads, or a lot of people read my articles, or I have a lot of followers on social media, and that's why my opinion matters.
I'm from Instagram, and we're a lot better than Twitter.
I can post a selfie with my hat backwards and put hot takes on it and think I'm good at stuff.
So, and if any of you are really confused, follow us on Twitter. This will start to make a hell of a lot more sense.
Yes.
We're not going to give the douchebag publicity, so you're just going to have to go find out for yourself.
So yeah, this is just a situation though where and we love the majority of the fantasy community, but there are a few bad apples out there, and we ran into one of the uglier ones
It's
here
a
this
great
week.
community. It like we just said, like sometimes, negative things get spun out of control more than, than the positive. There's a lot of positive that happens within this community.
We're a little bit over a year, and I've met, 3 people now that I just haven't liked that are part of the industry. And 2 of them happened within the last 3 days. So,
And they were both mainly Instagram people, weren't they?
yeah.
So I'm not sure. I didn't even know that the fantasy industry was that big on Instagram. So we're gonna have to
I didn't know how it could be.
look into that a little bit more
Because they buy followers.
But we prefer Twitter. That's our home.
It's more interactive. We can do more than just post pictures at you.
All right. So that's the last argument we have on there. Is there anything else we wanted to add on this before we do a quick preview of next episode?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. So up for next episode, we're going to look into mystery players, basically players that based on whether they have we're not quite sure how talented they are. They're in a weird depth chart. There's been a lot of upheaval in their team. We're not quite sure how they're going to project out over the year, and we expect that these are going to be the types of players that we're going to see a lot of arguments about over this summer. So we figured we'd get ahead of them and start talking about some of them now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else you want to add before we call it an episode?
Watch us on YouTube, Beerfield Fantasy Football. Look at the shirts, look at the hats. If you want one, shout out.
Yeah, DM us on Twitter.
We're going to be in Fort Worth, Texas, for the fantasy football convention. It got moved from Dallas to Fort Worth, per their reason. So we're going to be down there. So if you guys are going, come find us.
Yep.
And we'll
shout out to us. DM us. We'll find you. We'll have a beer with you. We'll hang out.
Yeah, and if you decide you really don't want to use Twitter, we recommend it, but you don't have to. You can also shoot us an email at beerfieldfantasy@gmail.com. We're on Facebook, Beerfield Fantasy Football, Instagram, Beerfield FF. Anything else I'm forgetting besides?
No.
Nope. Podcast, which you're obviously listening to it from someplace, but we're everywhere there. If you would, leave a review on iTunes, go give us a rate, help us out, help us bump up there. So check that out. And YouTube comments and stuff are always appreciated.
Yep. Yeah, just anywhere you can add that. That stuff seems small, but if we can get enough of that really starts to boost our presence and is going to get more people listening, which helps us grow. It kind of feeds into itself. So if you guys can do any of that for us, we really appreciate it. Whether it's following us on Podbean, subscribing on iTunes, leaving reviews, comments, likes, all of that is hugely important to us.
Shout outs on Twitter. We always love seeing that.
Absolutely, that too. So yeah, I think that's all we've got for Monday's episode here. We are at Beerfield FF. Shining out here is at Nick Sparts. Across the table from me is Dan Thury.
At Thury BFF.
And to my left, rocking the hat, is Christopher Hopper.
At Hot BFF with 2 P's, we will see you Wednesday.
See you guys next time.
The way that you set that up was just really weird for me.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, we're going to need to restart that.
No, we don't. No retakes. We don't do it.
We'll catch you guys next time on Beer Fueled Fantasy Football.
See ya.
There we go.